Hello students, welcome again to the new segment. In this segment, we will be looking at the very first step in analyzing and building your machine learning algorithms using MATLAB. And that first step is to grab your data and then transfer it into the MATLAB environment. So let's look at some example. Remember that we have a lot of data available over the internet. And a very useful place for browsing a different kind of machine learning data that is available for experimentation is to go to the machine learning repository. It's an online repository that contains different kinds of data sets corresponding to different machine learning problems. I will use the very frequently used data set, that is the ARIES data set. So when you click on this data set, a lot of information regarding this data set will appear, such as the number of instances it contains, the data set characteristics, the number of attributes, and so on. So when we go to the data folder of this particular data set, there is a file that is the .data file, and it contains actually all the data corresponding to this data set. Right, so we can actually copy this data set and make a copy of it and store it somewhere on our system. Right? And then we can read it into the MATLAB environment. Right? So we can just copy it, select it, copy it, and then paste it into an Excel sheet, and then save it with appropriate extension so that we can read it into the MATLAB environment. So I have stored it in two types. Right? One is the CSV file, which contains the same data as the data that is present over here. The CSV stands for comma-separated version, right? And in this case, since all the data has been separated by a comma, right? So that's why I saved it in a CSV file. Alternatively, when you open the same data in Excel, you can save it in XLS format or XLSX format, and so many different formats that you can save it. When your data is in some other format and not in these formats, then there is another procedure for reading that in the MATLAB environment, and we will cover that as well. So don't worry about that. Okay, so once we have the data, the preferred data type or the preferred way of transferring it into the MATLAB environment so that it becomes very easy to manipulate using the machine learning algorithms is data of a table data type. Remember that we have simple data types such as the numeric data type or character data type or so many others. But the essential difference between those data type and a table data type is that the table data type can contain data in various formats, right? So such as numeric, floats, integers, characters, strings, and so many others. That's the essential difference. So in order to read that data, we need to use the built-in function that is read table, and then we need to mention the path where our data is stored, and that path needs to be enclosed in these brackets, right? And then we need to mention the path. So my path is C, and the file name is 1, and the extension is CSV, and then we need to assign it into some meaningful variable. So let's say it's T in this case. So when we press enter, now we may notice that something has appeared over here. That means that our T variable, which is a table data type, has now been updated and it's available for manipulation. And it contains 150 rows and 5 columns. So if you want to have a look at some of the data, you can do that with the help of a colon operator. The colon operator is very useful in MATLAB. And with the colon operator, we need to specify an initial and final position. So if we mention it from 1 to 5, it will mean generate numbers from 1 to 5. And when we mention it inside the table environment, so it will mean that please, we are working with the first 5 rows, right, from 1 to 5. And then after comma, we are selecting the columns. So in this case, I am just mentioning the column without the initial and the final point, which means that display all the corresponding columns. So now when we press enter, it is going to display the first 5 rows corresponding to all columns, right? And that is our data here. Please note that the variable names var1, var2, var3, var4, var5, since our data does not contain the variable names, so it is going to give it a default name, variable var1, var2, var3, var4, var5. If we want to change that, you can do that with the help of the properties of the table. And we can mention variable names. And then you can give new variable names to the variables that you want to have to appear over here. And we can enclose it in quotes. And we can say sepal length. Remember that the variable names should not contain any spaces. And then we can say sepal width. And then we can say petal length. And then finally petal width. And you can say that the final variable in this case is the response variable, so we call it a class. When we press enter, it is going now to update our variable names. So if we display it again, we now see that the variable names have been changed and they look a little bit more meaningful now. We can also have a look at some of the statistics of this table. And it's going to display some of these statistics for the different variables. That is the minimum value for this sepal length. It is 4.3, the median is 5.8, and the maximum is 7.9. Similarly, some other statistics of the other variables. For the last variable, it does not display any mathematical statistics since it is not a numeric variable, rather it is a different data type, right? So that's why it's not displaying any particular statistic for that. The other way around is to use the import data tool. And with this import data tool, you need to mention the place of the file where it is being located. So you need to browse it. So let's say this is my file. So I will select it. So once I select it, another window is going to appear and that will contain our data, right? So in this case, this is called the import tool and it contains all of our data. So by default, it is going to give it the default variable names. You can redefine them and you can give them meaningful names such as sepal length and so on, right? But for now, I just keep the default names. And then automatically it is going to learn its type, right? So it is saying that the last variable is of type text and the rest of the variables are numeric. So once you select the data, you can select it by pressing the control button and then clicking on the corresponding columns that you want to import into the MATLAB environment. And then you need to click this right button and then it will read all the data into the MATLAB environment, right? So we have all the data in the MATLAB. And now you can create a table out of that. So we call it T1 and you can say table var1, just mention the variable names, var2, all the variables that are appearing over here, similarly var3, var4, var5. Now it will create a table and all the data has now been read into the table T1. If you want to have a look at some of the instances, right? Or just say T1. So it contains all the data that we have just imported. So you can use either of the methods, either use a read table function or use the import tool in order to import the data into the MATLAB environment. And once the data has been imported, then we are ready to apply some machine learning algorithms on top of that. So in the next few lectures, we are going to cover more